When I was a new GM, I would conceal my roles from the players. And as a consequence, I would occasionally feel tempted to fudge the dice. And by that, I mean to secretly change the outcome of a roll. And every time I did this, it left me feeling guilty, and I couldn't understand why it was that I was left feeling dissatisfied. Eventually, I realized that I was denying my players and myself a genuine experience because we had an unspoken agreement that we were going to allow the game's mechanics to govern outcomes, and yet here I was forcing outcomes to conform to my own preferences. And this made the game feel shallow once I had come to understand that my dice rolling was purely performative. If I could choose to ignore the dice whenever I felt like it, then rolling the dice was entirely pointless. In order to avoid the temptation to fudge the dice, I just started openly rolling in front of the players. And this immediately improved my games because for two reasons. One, now I was relieved of the burden of deciding who lived and who died because now I didn't need to decide when to fudge the dice and when not to fudge the dice to spare a character. And secondly, the transparency of open rolling added a lot more tension to the game because now the players knew for certain that I was not going to fudge the dice and they knew I was not going to be pulling any punches. Now, there are game masters who openly admit to fudging rolls, and they believe that by doing so, they are improving their games. But if you believe that manipulating the dice improves your game, then you probably don't recognize what your primary function is as a game master. Your job is not to come up with some elaborate narrative and then try and force outcomes to comply with your story each session. When you decide to override the dice and force an outcome, you do not know in that moment if your preference is the same preference as everyone else at the table, and you do not know that your forced outcome would result in a better story than what you would have achieved if you have just let the dice decide the outcome. One of the most fun and memorable moments that my table has had was a session of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and we nearly had a TPK. At the end of the combat, the only two combatants left standing were one of the characters and the leader of this evil cult. This surviving character had spent their last turn reloading a pistol, and now the whole combat hinged on this final pistol shot because if this attack was not successful, it was almost a certainty that the cultist was going to kill them on the next turn. So the player rolls their attack, it's a success, roll damage dice. We get all these exploding tens because it's second edition and you have Oryx Fury. And so the damage dice are exploding. The character deals a ton of damage to this cultist and everyone at the table jumps up, celebrates, they're cheering. And it was such a powerful moment. And here's the thing, if I had decided earlier in that combat encounter to fudge the dice and spare those other characters, you wouldn't have had that much tension at the end of the combat. And that final epic moment would not have been as impactful. And I can tell you, everyone at the table was overcome with a sense of joy because that last surviving character had avenged the fallen party. I just want to leave you with one last piece of advice. Embrace the emergent story. One of the things that makes this hobby so special and unique is that the game is unpredictable. The players and the game master show up each session without any certainty of where the story is going to lead. The players interact with the game master's world, the game master reacts to the players' choices, and they are trying to create a level of verisimilitude that enhances the immersion for the players. And as a consequence of this, yes, there are going to be times when characters are going to die. And yes, there are going to be times when the story goes in directions that the game master did not predict. But that is one of the things that makes this kind of storytelling, this kind of gaming so awesome. So stop fudging your dice. Embrace the emergent story, and I'll talk to you again soon.